Okay, folks, episode number 1 of Big Blue Blitz. Matt Genatino here along with Jeff Magliacetti. Jeff, I think that is the official name. Am I correct? I think that is what everyone settled on.
No, people nailed it. I thought you were talking about my last name. People always mess that up, but you nailed it the first time around. So well done, and I'm on board with it. So as long as you are,
Okay,
rolling. As long as you are, and our listening audience, of course, let's do it.
there we go. So we are ready to roll episode 1 of many, we hope, season 1. So with this episode, we really just wanted to touch on the basics for you guys, give you a little taste of what's to come for the future. And we're gonna, recap the off season, which was an eventful one to say the least for the Giants after a eventful and out of the ordinary for them kind of season last year, which had the franchise kind of up and down in a weird spot. And I think that they're looking to recover from that.
I mean, the thing is, Matt, this offseason was all about the Giants have low-key become the more laughing stock franchises in this league, for lack of a better term. Yeah. And it seems ludicrous to say at first glance because, look, I'm sure there are plenty of fans in, like, I don't know, Cleveland, for example. Cleveland Browns fans would give their left arm to have the type of mediocrity the Giants have had over the past half decade, but they love that. But here's the thing. Missing the playoffs 5 of the past 6 seasons, which dates back to their last Super Bowl title, Super Bowl 46 back in 2012. Missing the playoffs 5 out of 6 seasons and getting blown out in that one playoff cameo, that is unacceptable in a place like New York. That cannot happen. This is a franchise that's built on winning. It's built on tradition. It's built on hard-nosed, smash-mouth football. And last season was the epitome, the climax of all this, the culmination of just pure mediocrity, poor management, and silliness that permeated throughout the organization over the past few seasons. So basically, as the old mantra goes, they had nowhere to go but up this offseason. But not only did they go up, they very much improved. And it's clear that they are looking to get back into the title consideration as soon as possible, and also that they built for the future. This was a rare offseason where they built themselves to win now and then maybe a little later. So props to Giants in that regard. We'll see how it plays out on the field fairly soon.
Yeah, I think what's pretty cool about like what you said there with the Giants is they didn't just win now, and I think that, they didn't build just to win now in a sense. Which seems to be a key talking point for a lot of people. They keep saying, well, Eli Manning, he's getting up there in age. He has maybe 2-3 years left. They're in win now mode. There's no deny, I think, that they're in win now mode with Eli where he is. But like you said, they also have a good core now for the future based off what they did, not only with their coaching staff, but what they did in free agency and in the draft. I think it's a nice combination of win now mode, guys who can win who are a little older with veterans, but they definitely have a good solid core moving forward with the young guys as well.
The draft, for example, was perhaps the epitome of the win now and win later type of situation, because the first 3 picks in that draft, I think those were meant to be win now types. You get Saquon Barkley and Will Hernandez in the first 2 rounds, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but Will Hernandez was an absolute gem for the Giants in the second round with that second overall pick in the second round. But that was huge for them, because I saw Will Hernandez as a first round talent, and the Giants pulled the no-brainer move and picked him up. That was an absolute no-brainer, and they took it, so good on them. And they also brought in with their first 3 picks, the last of those was Lorenzo Carter, who's expected to be a solid edge rusher and defensive coordinator James Betcher's new 3-4 set. So that's going to be interesting for him. And also, you look at the acquisitions they made this offseason, it's a bunch of guys who, they have experience, but they have solid experience. Like, take, for example, the acquisition of Alec Ogletree. Not too long ago, this guy was an all-pro linebacker, so it's good to have him here. He's still relatively young as well. He kind of lost his footing in the Los Angeles Rams defense, kind of lost his role in there in a way. So this is a good place for the Giants to, a good redemption sort of project for him. You look at Jonathan Stewart too, for example. People kind of ripped on that signing. I'm still kind of worried on how much money he was getting on this initial contract, but with Jonathan Stewart in there, the Giants can now form themselves something similar to what the Philadelphia Eagles formed this past season. Because the Eagles, when Carson Wentz went down, Nick Foles was inserted, and all props to him in the world. He did a great job. Obviously, look what he did in Super Bowl 52 this past February. But what took pressure off of him immediately was a solid triumvirate of running backs, which is increasingly a resurrected position in today's NFL. You look what the Dallas Cowboys and the Los Angeles Rams have done with Ezekiel Elliott and Todd Gurley. The Cowboys, for example, Elliott might have been the key to that entire offense. When he had to serve that 6-game suspension, look what happened to the offense. They plummeted. Look what happened to the Rams when Todd Gurley only had 3.2 yards per carry in 2016. Their offense plummeted as well. But what the Giants can do, similar to what the Eagles did, the Eagles used a 3-headed run game of LeGarrette Blount, Corey Clement, and Jay Ajayi. They used it to immediately take pressure off a role player starting at quarterback. And Eli Manning is obviously not a role player. I think we can all agree that he's going to be a Hall of Famer someday. But his abilities clearly are not what they used to be. I think we can all agree on that as well. And we can all agree that he's reaching the twilight of his career. But no longer with this running back set of Saquon Barkley, of course, their second overall pick, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Stewart, and Wayne Gallman. People forget about him. He was starting to get the lion's share of carries in the late stages of last season. And what they can do, it takes immediate pressure off the quarterback. No longer does Eli have to depend on Odell Beckham Jr. miracles to win games anymore. Here's a little stat for you. Odell Beckham Jr. has played in 48 games for the New York Giants, and the Giants are 21-27 overall in these games. And when he is targeted at least 11 times, that record drops to 8-14. And when he's targeted at least 13 times, that record falls all the way to 3-7. And I believe when he's targeted at least 15 times, that goes to 1-4. So no longer does Eli Manning have to force the ball to Odell Beckham Jr., force him to win on Odell miracles in that regard. The Giants, for the first time in forever, remember, it's been almost 2 calendar years since they've scored at least 30 points in one game, which is a death sentence.
Crazy.
Oh, it's a death sentence in today's NFL, which values fantasy football over anything. It's a very football-oriented league, and that's unacceptable. So for the first time in forever, the Giants' offense is a legitimate full-force threat.
Agreed. Yeah, I think with like you said, a couple of the offseason acquisitions is the one that really gets me, like you had brought up quickly, was Alec Ogletree, a guy that they acquired in a trade from the Los Angeles Rams. Now, Ogletree is a guy who has some familiarity with the 3-4 defense. Now, when he was at Georgia, he was a first-round guy coming out. The Rams took him out of St. Louis when they were there. And he was a guy who, had that little tiff with Odell Beckham when they played back in St. Louis back in the day. But he brings something to the Giants that they haven't had, I believe, in a long time at the linebacker position. I feel that they're finally valuing the linebacker spot this offseason. And I think that goes back to kind of the Dave Gettleman acquisition as well, who's used to that old school Giants, smash mouth football on the offensive and defensive side of the balls, especially. So I think Alec Ogletree is going to bring not only leadership to that young linebacker room, but he's going to bring an on the field presence that's going to be something unlike we've seen from a Giant linebacker in quite some time.
Well, it's funny you should mention the linebacker problem, because obviously the offensive line was ignored for ages and came back to haunt them badly in 2017. But the linebacker group was a unit that was ever so subtly ignored over the past years. Now, this is a Giants team for the record. And by the way, I just want to talk about your Ogletree thing with Beckham. They have indeed talked about that, and
they're okay.
Yes, it is all wonderful.
All is all right. Yes.
It happened, like, if I recall, it happened in a December game, the Giants' last ever trip to St. Louis, and the Rams were wearing their just fantastic throwbacks.
Love those, yes. The mustard yellow and
yes. Brings me back to the days of Kurt Warner and Marshall Faulk and Torrey Holt, and good Lord, I'm old. But but they said it's fine, happened during Christmas, so I guess everything's tidings of comfort and joy to Ogletree from Odell and vice versa. But in terms of the linebacker spot, this is this Giants team that has prided itself, that has very much benefited from the exploits of the linebacker position. Because you look through the halls of Quest Diagnostics Training Center, you look through the parking lots of MetLife Stadium, you still see these jerseys everywhere. You see Lawrence Taylor, you see Carl Banks, you see Harry Carson. In fact, you go through the hallway of Quest, you look around in the hallway leading to the Giants locker room, there's a huge mural dedicated to their Super Bowl victories. And in the Super Bowl 46 one, of course, that being the second one over the Patriots, prominently highlighted is Chase Blackburn's interception of Rob Gronkowski, which
Sure.
I think goes down as one of the more unsung plays in Giants history by the course of that entire game. So Chase Blackburn, he was always known as a special teams player, but he did a good job there. But in recent years, linebacking was kind of a forgotten aspect of Giants football. The last time prior to Carter that they took a linebacker within the first 2 days of the draft, meaning the first 3 rounds, was Clint Sintom.
Yes.
Yes, right? Clint Sintom out of
Virginia.
Yes, nailed it. Well done. Well done.
Yes, sir.
It's just a sign that probably you and I both need socialize more me to that extent. And the last time they had a Pro Bowler in the linebacker spot, want to take a guess on that one?
I'm going to go with Antonio Pierce.
Yes, Antonio Pierce back in 2006. Well done. The force is strong with this one, and hopefully the force is strong with this show. So finally, the Giants are starting to address the linebacker spot because look what happened last year again. They had, as the season went on, B.J. Goodson kind of had a strong opening to the season, and I think he's going to be a key piece to this puzzle. He had 18 tackles in that season-opening loss to the Dallas Cowboys, then dealt with injuries for the remainder of the season. Then you go on for the rest of the season, and injuries and forced undrafted rookies and random signings to come out. Free agent signings like Kelvin Shepard, for example, who was with he was just still on the free agent list, and they took him finally. They brought him back in the service. Had a solid season finale against Washington, to be fair to Kelvin, but either way, it was not a pretty situation for the Giants. But they're finally starting to address it, and it just signals, like you said, Dave Gettleman, who knows this Giants team, who knows what it means to be part of Big Blue. Remember, he was part in the scouting department for over a decade, helped some of these guys get here, helped some of the greats suit up for them. Many were pleased when he was named general manager of the Giants, and he did a solid job with the Carolina Panthers. Like you said, he knows what it means to be part of Big Blue. He knows this not trash talk, but smash mouth brand of football that has permeated throughout the franchise for decades. I think it's going to work to their benefit.
Absolutely. And I think also in that linebacker room, a key piece that they kept in this offseason actually isn't a player at all. And I think he'll be a big key to their success is their coach Bill McGovern. He worked at Boston College for years. He helped develop guys like Luke Kuechly. He worked he was with the Eagles for years. So he definitely knows how to get the most out of his linebackers. And I believe with the Eagles ran a 3-4 system. So he worked with their outside linebackers. He's going to be big in their development, I believe, with guys like Lorenzo Carter, B.J. Goodson. You have a player coach like an Alec Ogletree. I think it's only an added bonus for them to help continue, that leadership and that development of players to get some good, solid guys. And like we talked about earlier with Lorenzo Carter, my view with a lot of this Giants draft, and especially with Carter, I felt like they almost picked guys that should have went almost a round before. Obviously, besides Saquon Barkley, you can't obviously go before that. But
Barkley's that kind of talent.
Right. Exactly. So, you look at it like Lorenzo Carter. I personally said I had him late second round. I know they got him early in the third round, but his value there was, I thought, fantastic. I love Lorenzo Carter. You put on the tape against Notre Dame, and you really see what he could do in a 3-4 defense. I think he's really on his best football is yet to come. I think once he grows into his body a little bit more, and again with the help of Coach Bill McGovern, I think he's really gonna flourish in the Giants' defense.
That's a great point you make, especially in terms of McGovern. He is the longest tenured coach on this staff, by the way, and it's for a good reason. He's developed plenty of strong talent back there, and actually did a pretty solid job with some of the undrafted guys back there. The guys like Calvin Munson and Curtis Grant, for example, they were solid. They did their job in that system. Hopefully there's a spot for these guys on the team come the 2018 regular season. And what you were saying about Carter, I think you were right. I think he should have gotten in the second round. The thing about Carter's Georgia career is he kind of had a lot of hype coming into Athens. I don't think he ever truly fulfilled that hype, but still a bit of a work in progress. He's kind of taking longer than expected to develop. Whether that's a product of himself or the Georgia coaching staff, time will only tell. But here's something that should warm Giants fans' heart everywhere. Carter, you may recall, was the guy who blocked a potential go-ahead field goal for Oklahoma in last year's college football playoff. denying a win to quarterback Baker Mayfield in that game. That's something you could definitely keep an eye on. And that's, I think, one of the Giants' more subtle problems last year was special teams. And I think Carter could be one of those guys because special teams were special in name only last season. And as a former long snapper at both Don Bosco Prep and Marist, as a matter of fact, it was downright offensive to me. I'm sorry. Yes. It was downright offensive because so many special teams gaffes cost the Giants in these situations. I think Carter can be part of the guys. That's one of the things that they looked for when they drafted guys. They want to see how they can contribute immediately in the special teams format. So if Carter can do that, I think they'll be in solid shape, and he will help this team in more ways than one.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeff, like you said, not only in the draft did they look to fill the obviously the both sides of the ball, but in free agency they did as well. And the third aspect of football, like you said, with the Giants have kind of looked away from, I think, in years past with Tom Quinn, who I thought should have, left the Meadowlands quite earlier, is special teams. Not only do the draft picks can play special teams, a lot of their free agent guys are key special teams players. Michael Thomas and Curtis Riley and there's a lot of other guys here that could make this roster. An undrafted free agent, Grant Haley. I think a lot of guys are going to be asked to end up coming in and playing a big key on special teams and being, honestly, I feel, can be studs on special teams.
About Thomas, by the way, he over the past 3 seasons, I believe he has finished in the top, at least the top 5 in special teams tackles in each of the past 3 seasons over with the Miami Dolphins. And another guy I think you could talk about is Cody Latimer.
Sure.
Cody Latimer, yeah, he could be a third receiver and be a return guy. So.
Yeah, I think Cody Latimer actually is a great get for them. I think he was kind of in a weird situation in Denver with their offense with, of course, Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders. I think he was just he never really found his niche there. And I think the Giants have a real opportunity for him to come in and prove himself in more ways than one in the return game, like you said, and as the third receiver. So that'll be something to definitely watch moving forward. One thing I did want to touch on, though, and I think we would be remiss if we did not, like you said, the linebackers, have been a big problem for the Giants for years. But like we said, the offensive line, Hog Mollies, Dave Gettleman, you knew you were getting that day one when Gettleman came in, and they addressed that with Nate Solder, Patrick Omame. They brought back restricted free agent Brett Jones. Potentially moving over Eric Flowers to right tackle. God only knows what will happen with that, but signs of encouragement, I think, with the offensive line.
The Giants have been actually very pleased. Of course, OTAs have been going on in recent weeks, and the Giants have been pleased thus far with Flowers' progress over at the right tackle spot, namely head coach Pat Shurmur. Let me pull up a quote for you, what you said in terms of what Flowers has been able to do. He was asked how Flowers has been doing. He said, quote, "He's actually done a really good job. He's an excellent athlete, and he's handling the move pretty seamlessly. Through the first 2 weeks of his training, I think he's made improvements." So that's definitely something you want to hear from your head coach coming in. And the willingness to address the offensive line, I think, was huge in the early going because, let's face it, I think offensive linemen, other than probably a punter and long snapper, because me being biased, I think offensive lineman is probably the most underrated position in perhaps all of sports, as a matter of fact, because these are guys who rarely, if ever, show up in the box score unless they recover a fumble in the end zone or go on a tackle eligible play.
It's like Nebraska, the fumble Rooski.
Yeah, that's right. Good call. But so those are some lucky guys right there. Yes. As a matter of fact, definitely. And of course, maybe just for fun, you can hand the ball off to them. In a blowout game, you hand the ball off to them as an extra fullback to rub it in a little. But more often,
that's where Eric Flowers has missed his calling, Jeff. Eric Flowers missed his calling as Refrigerator Perry.
Well, every time he gets the end zone, I guess we could say it's a bloom, right? There we go.
Exactly.
But I digress. These are guys who more often not than Eric Flowers notwithstanding,
yes,
do not show up in the box score. Right. But these are the guys that help your team move because Look what the Dallas Cowboys were able to do by slowly building their offensive line throughout the years. They were able to develop an extremely potent offense for themselves, and one that kept a mediocre defense off the football field for as long as possible. So props on them. And I think the Giants finally started to realize it that this offseason. You rewind to an offseason ago. It's an offseason that I like to call the Giants offseason of opulent and luxurious spending. Here's what they basically bought themselves a Porsche in this sense. They brought in a flashy free agent signing from Brandon Marshall, who has not only been one of the elite receivers in the NFL for pretty much a decade by this point. It also served as a chance to rub it in the Jet fans a little bit, like, oh, look what we're doing. We're bringing in one of your guys yet again, and we're gonna finally be the team that takes them to the playoffs, et cetera, et cetera. They re-signed Jason Pierre-Paul to a massive big deal. That was like, hey, look at this. We signed our guy who will forever go down in Giants lore, a Super Bowl hero in a way. We just re-signed to a massive deal. Then you look at their draft picks. They picked their first 3 picks. First, they picked Evan Ingram, a tight end out of Ole Miss, a guy who went to Eli Manning's alma mater. That was flashy. In the second round, they picked the college football national champion in Dalvin Tomlinson out of the University of Alabama. And then in the third round, they picked the highest quarterback they have taken since Eli Manning back in 2004. Yes, thank you. I always confuse 4, but what's okay. Yes, and because Davis Webb was not meant to be, and here's some names for you. He was not meant to be an Andre Woodson, a Rhett Bomar, or Ryan Nassib. This was the first guy the Giants truly envisioned as the heir to the Eli Manning empire. But so this was an offseason of opulence for them. So they bought themselves a Porsche, but in regards to that, they ignored the mold damage in their basement. That mold damage, of course, being the offensive line. Yeah, they eventually brought in DJ Fluker, but it took him forever to get on the field, and I think he actually did pretty well for himself.
I thought he actually, in my opinion, I think he could have deserved another contract with the Giants.
I thought that should have been one of their priorities this offseason, as a matter of fact, but it didn't happen, and it kind of worked out for the better, them getting Nate Solder and whatnot. But sure. You look at the other moves they tried to make last offseason, barely any of them involved linemen. In the draft, they waited all the way until the 6th round to take Adam Bisnowaty out of Pitt, and he is no longer on the team, as a matter of fact. He spent all but 1 game on the practice squad last season. He's no longer on the team. They waived him earlier this month.
I will say, in that pick's defense, and not as far as Bisnowaty goes, but as far as that pick, because a lot of people, I think Giant fans will look at that as a wasted pick. Okay, but you look at, they got Chad Wheeler, who's an undrafted guy, who probably should have been drafted if he didn't have off-the-field concerns going in. Now, you could look at that as the swap. You could say you kind of picked Bisnowaty as the undrafted guy, and you picked Chad Wheeler up in the 6th round. So that could kind of be the swap there, because I think Chad Wheeler is still very much in the mix at the right tackle spot, if not this year, maybe potentially next year as well.
The Giants do have high hopes for Wheeler, and they had him ever since he landed to them via undrafted free agency. Like you said, there were off the field issues. He was suspended for the Holiday Bowl in his junior year for an off the field incident. So that's probably what caused him to go undrafted. But in terms of calling Bisnowaty a wasted pick, it kind of does get a little bit more hate because the Giants traded up with the Tennessee Titans to make that selection, and it's a 6th round pick. I think. Right. And the thing is about Bisnowaty, there was a bit more of a spotlight on him because he was probably the most prominent move the Giants made at one of their biggest needs in the offseason, and he went on to play 1 game, a game in which he picked up 2 holding penalties and nothing of the sort after that. I was at that game. It was that season finale, Giants Redskins, and I think it will personally go down as the coldest preseason game in NFL history. So,
Jeff, and you were probably paid to be there. You couldn't pay me to be at that game. I'll tell you that much. As much as I love the Giants, I don't think that was a game you'd catch me at, but that's okay. Nonetheless,
hey, they won for the record, so
there you go.
And it was history. Kirk Cousins' final game in a Washington uniform, and it was a time that many believed that it would be Eric Flowers' last game in a Giants uniform as well. And that's actually something I wanted to talk about as well. Yeah. Flip gears on you a little bit, but one thing I wanted to say about Flowers is that he has been part of what the Giants like to call, I think this started with Gettleman, They're calling it a bit of a blank slate initiative.
Clean slate. Yep.
Clean slate. That's, excuse me.
No, clean blank. That's fine.
Blank space. I'm sorry. I got
no, that's right.
But terms of a clean slate, Gettleman coined this term, I believe, while doing scouting for the Combine when he was asked about Eric Flowers. And Flowers is not the only one who has been granted this clean slate. Right. The other one granted this clean slate has been Eli Apple. Because let's go back to January of this year. I think everyone and their mother thought that Flowers and Apple were goners for sure.
Right.
Everyone foresaw it coming. It was a foregone conclusion. But with Gettleman and this new staff, they've sat down with these guys. Eli Apple actually gave a pretty heartfelt press conference a couple weeks ago in which he mentioned he was, quote, embarrassed at the way that 2017 went. And I don't think anything more needs to be said about what happened. There was the social media gaffes on Twitter. There was the civil war with both Landon Collins and the secondaries coach Tim Walton, who has since departed. I think nothing more needs to be said about that. Nothing more really needs to be said about Eric Flowers' failure to live up to a first-round pick. And in terms of Apple, a little bit of extra pressure has been put on both of these guys this offseason. Because Flowers, and you almost can't blame him for this, Flowers was none too pleased when the Giants not only signed Nate Solder, who has been a career left tackle, but they made him the highest paid lineman in the National Football League. So you can understand how Flowers took that as a slight. And you look at Apple, they brought some guys in, like you mentioned before. I believe they who'd you say, Curtis Riley they brought in, of course. They also brought in Grant Haley, who I think is definitely going to be an undrafted free.
Davis.
Who?
Aaron Davis from Georgia.
Yes, Lorenzo Carter's teammate at Georgia. That's another guy they brought in the secondary. Michael Thomas is safety, so don't really worry about that. But it was kind of a message to Apple as if to say, look, we still believe in you. You're still our guy, but you're kind of on thin ice. And I think this is going to be enough for him to kind of reignite his competitive spirit a little bit to get back to the solid numbers he posted as a rookie in 2016. So both of these guys are buying into this blank slate, the clean slate thing. And another guy who actually mentioned he was part of the team last year and actually was one of the few silver linings was B.J. Goodson.
Sure.
Like we talked about before, he had 18 tackles in his debut, briefly led the NFL in that category, his first career start, and then dealt with injuries the rest of the year. So he is willing to buy into this clean slate initiative, and he is ready to do more for this team, do more in this 3-4 set. So I think that the clean slate is going to be working in the best interests of everyone in the organization.
I agree. I think, going back to Flowers, because what type of Giants podcast or Giants talk would it be if we didn't speak ad nauseum about Eric Flowers? I think one of his biggest issues is I had met with a Giants scout, an area scout for the Giants, who told me he had scouted Eric Flowers quite a bit throughout his career at Miami. And he told me a couple things which really stuck out. And it kind of is something that a normal fan may not understand or just really get a grasp or a hold of that information other than that. And I think it kind of really put into perspective Eric Flowers a little bit more than just the player, more so Eric Flowers the person. Now, if you recall, Eric Flowers came out of Miami fairly young, okay? And he has really, at 6'7", 6'8", I think he is around that, 330 pounds. At that young of an age, 19 years old, he hasn't really even grown into his body yet. He's still a little awkward, very raw, coached in a spread offense at Miami. He grew up where his father ended up being his best friend. And he ended up hanging out with his dad so much that his dad became like his trainer. And you see guys like Weston Richburg and Jeff Schwartz going to LaCharles Bentley offensive line performance in the offseason, and Eric Flowers is working out with his father. So there's the difference there when you look at Eric Flowers and how he came out young. He's kind of immature to begin with. He has some family stuff going on. He didn't have an agent, if you recall. He just hired Drew Rosenhaus a couple weeks ago, and he was using his father as his agent. So I think a lot of people tend to forget about that or don't know that about Eric Flowers. And I think you see now with Nate Solder coming on, almost a little bit more that older brother, hey, I'm here to help you, not to hurt you. Let's do what we can. He's staying after practice with Flowers and helping him out. And Nate Solder, again, I think that speaks volumes about that signing alone. regardless of what he'll do on the field. But some things I always notice with Eric Flowers, real quick, I wanted to touch on when his technique as far as that goes. Eric Flowers is a big – now, coming from me, I played offensive line in college at Cortland State before I transferred to Jeff and I's alma mater, Marist College. But Eric, I think when you watch him, a lot of times what he'll do is he bends at his waist and he'll bend over rather than bending at his knees. And he bends over – or his hips, using his hips. So he bends over at his waist and it ends up – he ducks his head. And he'll keep his hands outside. So he doesn't punch inside. He'll duck his head down, which then gets him off balance. And then also he ends up leaning because he then goes over and bends the wrong way over his waist. So I think that's a big issue when it comes to Eric Flowers. Unfortunately, Mike Solari, excuse me, couldn't clean that up. And he's a pretty decent offensive line coach. But hopefully – Hal Hunter can do that, and along with the guidance of maybe a little bit more maturity from Flowers, his rep group, and Nate Solder now there, maybe you're going to start to see a little turn with Eric Flowers, even if it is for 16 games, and then he calls his Giants career, an unfortunate one. But other than that,
and one thing to expand upon your point about him being young and him being somewhat immature in a football sense, people forget that he not only declared after his junior year at Miami, he declared for the draft immediately, but he only spent 2 seasons of those 3 years with the Hurricanes. He only spent 2 seasons at right tackle because remember, in his freshman year, he started as a left tackle before transferring over. So He's kind of still not fully developed. He's kind of still wasn't developed at his own position, or the other way around. I'm sorry, left, right.
No.
Yeah, you get what I mean, but he still wasn't fully developed at his own position coming into the NFL in a way. So that's
he was rushed into the left tackle spot, if you remember.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Miami was going through a bit of a craze back then. They were going through different coaches, felt like every single year down there. So
not only at Miami, but with the Giants as well, because Will Beatty was supposed to be the left tackle, and he tore his pec bench pressing in the offseason. So all of a sudden, Eric Flowers was to come in as the right tackle, really. And not that you can hide a guy in the offensive line in the NFL, but I think it would have helped his development to then translate to left tackle if that ever would have been the case. And he had jumped in, boom, right at left tackle from day one.
Making the case all the more painful for the Giants, that is the fact that with the very next pick, and that Rams took Todd Gurley. So I think it kind of stings when you know who. It stings even more when you know who made it there. But people tend to forget last season. Yes, there were several notable cases of Eric Flowers not living to his potential. I remember a case this offseason, matter of fact, a Chiefs writer posted a GIF of trying to highlight one of Kansas City's linebackers on a play.
Yes. And Reggie Ragland.
Yes, Reggie Ragland. Yes, that's right. And every Giant Twitter user in the tri-state area chose instead to focus on the fact that Eric Flowers had 3 opportunities to make a block on said play and whiffed on each one. So I felt bad for the poor Kansas City writer trying to point out how great of a play Ragland was making. Everyone's like, well, look at number 74. But I felt that pretty much defined Flowers' tenure in that way. But people forget last season. And, yeah, I know he had that awful start, against Detroit. Ziggy Ansah absolutely demoralized him in that home opener Monday night game. But people start to forget that not all the offensive line's problems were on Eric Flowers. In fact, he actually was posting some solid numbers in terms of Pro Football Focus grades as the season went on. That's a good way to, take a look at linemen a little bit. They obviously can't post stats or anything. Sure. They can't do anything like that. But Flowers was posting some solid grades in terms of his PFF numbers. It was other guys on the line who kind of were dropping the ball a little bit. Some of these guys were simply unexperienced, like Chad Wheeler and John Halapio, but also you had guys like Bobby Hart, who, of course, was released prior to the season finale. It was one of the first moves that Dave Gettleman made, and it was said that Hart kind of influenced Flowers in the wrong direction, to kind of maybe take the last week of the season off a little bit, and, of course, Hart paid the ultimate price for that. So now that the Giants have some solid mentors in there, like you said, Nate Solder could be a bit of a big brother to him in a way, help him, not hurt him in that case. I think that the Giants saw what they needed to do, and they saw that they had a chance to get to not only get some immediate help on the field, but to help Eric Flowers off the field as well. So it's a solid job by them to recognize that and do away with the problem cases.
Correct, I agree. And you get another guy in free agency on the offensive line, like Patrick Omame, who's very versatile when it comes to left guard and right guard. He could play both. He played right guard with Chicago for a little while, played left guard with the Jaguars, ended up being really just really not being signed by the Jaguars because of the big splash they made with Andrew Norwell. So I think at that point they felt that they can move away from him. Not saying that he's a bad player in that sense, but Andrew Norwell is obviously the cream of the crop when it comes to the guard position in the NFL, especially the left guard position. So I think that left Pat Omame out to kind of in the dust, and really to the Giants' benefit, I think, because his versatility is only going to help them moving forward at both guard spots. And then, again, Will Hernandez in the draft in the second round. So I think it's really fantastic what they've done there. And if they could hit lightning in a bottle with Flowers, they got a really good five up front. And if not, they'll have just the one issue to fix. But I think they can do that.
I think the improvement that the Giants have made to the offensive line this season, it dispels one of the biggest Saquon Barkley myths. I wrote an article earlier this offseason on EliteSports.com, and I basically took a look. And because Saquon Barkley is a fantastic athlete, and Giants fans did not like this signing, this drafting at all. A certain legion of Giants fans. I certainly don't speak for the entire fan base, don't get me wrong, but certain legions kind of did not like this pick. And one of the reasons for that was one of their big complaints was, quote, how is he going to run behind this line? It's terrible. But the Giants have taken care of that in a way. Like, let's go back to last season. Orleans Darkwa, as a matter of fact, he actually had a solid year, and I think the Giants are going to miss him in a way a little bit. He was a bit of an unsung hero back there, and he had himself a solid season. I think it's downright shocking to me that he hasn't been signed by a team. I know he recently came out and said that he had some sort of injury problem that he had to take care of, and then he had a tryout with the Patriots. But it's just shocking to me that no one has picked him up yet. And he has a solid year running behind last year's Giant line, which we just got through saying was terrible. He had a 4.8 yards per carry behind that line, which was for ninth amongst running backs in the league amongst rushers with a certain number of carries. So if he could do that behind that line, who knows what Saquon Barkley could do behind this new and improved Giants offensive line. So that's definitely something I think that the Giants can do with that. And in terms of Norwell, here's the thing. Everyone and their mother had Norwell going to the Giants the second the season ending. Everyone wanted it. Everyone thought it'd be the optimal move for them. Everyone wanted the Giants to break open the bank and give this guy a contract. Believe me, I was one of them. I thought it was a match made in heaven for them. Ex-general manager, the man who discovered him as an undrafted free agent in Dave Gettleman, the Giants in desperate need of offensive line help, especially in the interior. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. Now, a lesser team would have cringed and made excuses, but it turned out the signing of Norwell to Jacksonville was inadvertently a blessing in disguise for this team. Yes. Because what the Giants were able to do, they were able to take that money that would have gone toward Norwell, an elite player, but of course, he's only one man. He can't play all five positions on the offensive line, although, I'd like to see him try it. He probably could do something.
He's a pretty big guy.
He's a big guy and probably could, put up a valiant effort, but it's obviously not going to lead to many wins. That's the thing.
That's true.
But the Giants were able to do. They took that money that could have gone to one elite talent, and they were able to dish that money out to several solid talents elsewhere on that offensive line. They gave that money to Nate Solder, eventually making him, again, the highest paid running lineman in football. They were also in that regard, they were able to add Omame. They were able to sign Brett Jones, who had himself a very solid season once Weston Richburg went down. And they were able to draft Will Hernandez, who ended up being one of the first Giants to sign his rookie deal. So the Giants have a new and improved offensive line, and they finally have a legitimate rushing game again. And another bit of trivia for both you and the listeners, can you name the last Giants 1,000-yard rusher?
Ahmad Bradshaw.
Nailed it. Back in 2010, which was the last time the Giants also finished in the upper half of the league rankings in terms of rushing. And the year they won the Super Bowl, the very next year after, the Giants were dead last in the league in rushing. So this has also been a problem for a long time. But now that they have a solid offensive line, now that they have a potentially three-headed monster running back, this is something that can very much pay dividends for them.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think what you're going to see with the Giants this year offensively, which is different than I think, of course, with Ben McAdoo, is the utilization of the tight ends and potentially a fullback, which I think is going to be great with the Giants' run game. I think Shane Smith deserves a roster spot on this team, personally, and I think that the two tight ends. Red Ellison, of course, played under Pat Shurmur's offense with the Vikings 2 seasons ago. And Evan Ingram, of course, is emerging, I think, as a top flight tight end in the league. And I think he's in for a big year to come down the seam and in the red zone. So I think that Pat Shurmur's offense will be predicated on running the football. Again, like he kind of said, eerily similar to the year offseason that the Vikings had last year on offense with the offensive line rebuild, Dalvin Cook. Similar here with the Giants. I think they have a lot of similar pieces. And to be honest with you, I think that the Giants pieces arguably are better than the Vikings pieces when it's all said and done.
I think you're right about that. And it's funny you should mention both the tight ends and the fullback spot, because I've been saying all offseason that Shane Smith is probably going to become the unsung hero of this Giants offense, especially with offensive coordinator Mike Shula in there, because look at the wonders Mike Shula was able to work once he got Mike Tolbert going in Carolina. That offense exploded from there on afterwards. And one of the biggest mistakes of the Ben McAdoo era, and trust me, there were many, one of the biggest mistakes was failure to utilize a fullback. Shane Smith won a hard-fought battle in training camp to not only prove that he belonged on the team, but an entire position belonged on the team. Because let's face it, gone are the days of, Daryl Johnston and Mike Allstott, in which you have these fullbacks on this roster, on rosters doing things week in and week out. It's more of a specialty these days. And if the Giants were able to fully utilize a fullback, it could have worked wonders for their offense. But let's go back to the September game against the Philadelphia Eagles over at Lincoln Financial Field. The Giants had 2 situations in that game in the first half in which they had 4th and 1 in Eagles territory, one of those situations being on the Philadelphia 1-yard line. The Giants elected to go for it on both times and did not use a fullback in either set, and they ended up getting stuffed on each one, and it might very well be in a game Philadelphia won on a 61-yard field goal.
Correct.
And Shane Smith played 1 snap in that game entirely and was soon waived thereafter, although he returned to the practice squad and later rejoined the team in the middle of the fall. So that was one of the biggest mistakes of the McAdoo era. I think once Smith gets to know Shula a little bit, it's going to work wonders for both of them. And in terms of the tight ends, you mentioned Evan Ingram and Rhett Ellison. I think, obviously you don't want to see injuries, God forbid. They're awful. Nobody wants to see them, no matter the team. It's terrible. And if you celebrate them, you got other issues. But
don't listen to our podcast if you do that.
No, please, no. We don't want you. My goodness. Tell your friends who don't think that way, please. But in a way, the many injuries in the Giants receiving corps was a blessing in disguise for Evan Ingram, because he was known for lining up both on the line and lining as a wideout at Ole Miss. And last season gave him an opportunity. It was basically once things got truly out of hand for the Giants, they basically had several games of research and development for the next few years. And one of those things they did was line up Ingram at wideout more often. So once Odell went down, once Brandon Marshall went down, once Sterling Shepard went down, Ingram got those opportunities. And there was no pressure on him because the Giants weren't making the playoffs anyway. So he got some snaps in there. And then McAdoo, another player he failed to utilize well, was Rhett Ellison. Once Steve Spagnuolo took over, you saw Ellison start to get a few more snaps on that line. And I think he's going to get some more opportunities on this line to both block and go out for the occasional pass or two, maybe go out to be a goal line option once everything gets settled in. And I think once we get to training camp, one of the more intriguing roster spot battles, one of the more reserve battles that we're going to keep an eye on is going to be Jarrell Adams against Kyle Carter. Kyle Carter was signed very early in this offseason by the Giants, and he is a likewise a former Shermer disciple, having spent the past season with the Minnesota Vikings, where Shermer was, of course, the offensive coordinator. And Jarrell Adams is an interesting case for the Giants. The team's 2016 sixth-round pick out of South Carolina. I just don't think Jarrell Adams, they really haven't found a spot to use Jarrell Adams in.
I'm a big Jarrell Adams fan, though. I like what he does. I like his game, to be honest.
Yeah, Jarrell Adams does have supporters out there, you among them. And I just don't think that Jarrell Adams, it just feels that the Giants haven't found the proper spot to use him yet, if that makes sense. It feels he's entering his third year, and his NFL career just seems kind of in a limbo so far, in a way, because sometimes the Giants want to use him as a blocker. Other times it appears he can be used as a goal line option. Other times he goes out for a deep pass. I recall he had a couple grabs last season, some key grabs, as a matter of fact, if I recall correctly, but they simply haven't utilized him to the way they haven't found his niche yet. They have not found the perfect spot to make him go. So I think this is going to be a very crucial summer for him, especially going up against a former Shermer disciple for that third tight end spot on the roster. So that's something to keep an eye on as we move forward.
Definitely. And Jeff, going back to these fullbacks and tight ends and offensive lines, you look at teams who win in the league. When the Giants won in 2008 and 2012, Madison Hedgecock, Henry Hynoski, right? Jake Ballard, Kevin Boss, even Bear Pasco, right? It's very similar to that feel, where, maybe Red Ellison plays the role of a Bear Pasco, right? And catches a playoff touchdown or just that blocking guy, similar with the Patriots. They had Aaron Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski and, even with the Eagles this year, Trey Burton, Brent Selleck, Zach Ertz, these tight ends, and like you mentioned before with the Eagles, the three-headed monster at running back that they had, that's what teams in this league, that's what they do. They have two tight ends, three tight ends who could do some damage. Again, even looking in Minnesota, they have they use the fullbacks, they use the plethora of running backs, McKinnon, Murray for years, my God, who they drafted last year. I just said his name before.
Dalvin Cook.
Dalvin Cook, thank you. So, I think the tight ends and fullbacks are, like you said, McAdoo kind of whiffed on that. It's kind of in a sense. And I think Evan Ingram was more of a weapon for Ben McAdoo than he was a tight end. And I still think that is the case. But I think that, again, opens up a case for a Jarrell Adams or a Kyle Carter kind of player to come in and just be effective and really help round out this team and give them something in their offense that they haven't had in years that good teams have.
Oh, definitely, because look throughout the years of the Super Bowl champions and what they've been able to do at tight end. I mean, look, nothing more needs to be said about the success New England has had with Rob Gronkowski, and look what Philadelphia was able to do with, like you said, Trey Burton, and lest we forget Zach Ertz at the same position, as a matter of fact.
Right.
But in fact, the Giants know better than anybody. Tight ends have torched them for years in that.
Correct.
Because how many times have we seen throughout the years, hey, look, Jason Witten's over the middle again for a 10-yard gain. Hey, there goes Jordan Reed again. I mean, Giants have been burned by this for years, as a matter of fact. And I think the first people in America who celebrated, who held a party when they discovered Jason Witten was retiring, was Giants fans. I think they had a ball in that. But with Evan Ingram, for the first time since very likely Jeremy Shockey, the Giants have a consistent presence at tight end, because guys have come and gone for the Giants at the tight end spot, and they've had their flashes of potential. Like you mentioned, Kevin Boss, Jake Ballard. Let's we forget Larry Donnell, as a matter of fact.
Larry Donnell.
Not forget that 1 year of Martellus Bennett in there. So the Giants have had flashes of brilliance at the tight end spot. That seemed to be one of Tom Coughlin's biggest strengths. He always seemed to find a gem at the tight end spot, it felt like, a hidden gem on short-term success.
The one year that they did not have success with the tight end, and I think as a Giants fan alone, very bothered by this, because Eli Manning likes the tight end, especially in the red zone.
Yeah.
And he had nothing out of – do you remember Brandon Myers?
Oh, how could I forget? Yes.
Right? Came over from Oakland. And then went to Tampa Bay after the Giants, and he was bad with the Giants. I thought for what the Giants were looking to do, again in the red zone, he couldn't really jump that high. He didn't have the size. He wasn't that good of a blocker. He just was like a what's that?
It was a Peyton Hillis year too, right?
I believe that was the Peyton Hillis year. It was a year. It reminded me. He reminded me. Brendan Myers reminded me of like Jerome Cunningham.
Huh.
You know what I mean? Like he was just like he's a second, third tight end. I mean, he was obviously a little bit more productive than that. And I don't.
Cunningham was, of course, labeled the JPP of tight ends, if you'll recall.
Adrian Robinson.
Yes.
From Cincinnati.
That
disaster.
Long story short, the Giants are glad they finally have a consistent presence at tight end.
Right.
Marcellus Rivers, there was another one.
Yes.
That's quickly forgotten. But Visante Shanko, as a matter of fact, too. But
yes,
this is a time that Giants fans are grateful they finally have a presence in the tight end spot all over again. They can finally be a threat. They can finally use a position that's been denied to them for years. And it's like I said at the top of the show, no longer does Eli Manning need to depend on Odell Beckham miracles in this regard anymore.
Correct. So, Jeff, with that, just wrapping up the show a little bit, what's one position battle? And we're going to do this, guys, listeners. We're going to be doing this as we move forward into training camp, kind of give you guys a little taste of what we're looking for in training camp, some position battles, some, lower name guys. So, Jeff, let's talk about that. And then, we'll see something you maybe have keep an eye out on moving forward for this team.
Sure. And in addition to the one I said before, that the third tight end spot, Jarrell Adams against Kyle Carter, that's one thing I would like to watch. I'm going to bring up another one, and prepare to roll your eyes once again, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be special teams all over again. I think the kicker.
What is special teams?
No, but the kicker spot is going to be something to look forward to this offseason, because the Giants currently have 2 kickers on their roster as is right now. The returning Aldrick Rosas, who won the battle out in training camp last year from veteran Mike Nugent, and they also brought in an undrafted rookie in Marshall Cohen, who of course was a kicker over at Iowa before entering the league. He played in 1 game last year with the Cincinnati Bengals, kicked 1 extra point, and other than that has not seen any regular season action in the league. So kicker is going to be a spot that the Giants are going to look at, because I think there's going to be a series of growing pains for this offense a little bit. And not in the sense of terms like that they're not going to score at all. I just think that the Giants, who have had trouble in the red zone throughout recent years, be kicking a lot of field goals in the early going. And we've seen how key field goal kickers can be in the NFC East. Dan Bailey, of course, prior to last year, was one of the most accurate kickers in NFL history. The Giants know all about the emergence of Jake Elliott, who, of course, booted that 61-yarder for the win in Philadelphia against them. And kickers are an important part of this league. I'm not just saying this as a former specialist. They're an important part of this league. They don't get enough credit. And I think I get a little annoyed sometimes that the NFL attempts to kind of curtail them a little bit, eliminate kickoffs, make the extra points longer. It's basically punishing the kickers for being too at their jobs in a way. And the Giants suffered in this regard at the kicker spot. Rosas did not carry over the success he had in the preseason, and it kind of came back to haunt them in some games. Like, remember that game against Kansas City? He missed that field goal. He did eventually end up kicking the game winner, but still, that's not something you want a kicker that you can rely on, especially in an offense that's still trying to get used to each other a little bit. It gives you a sense to escape they'll drive with points. So I think the Giants, who have overgone a bit of an overhaul at the special team spot, save for the staple of longtime long snapper Zach Diassi, everybody's changing back there. You're going to see a new punter. You're going to see a new returner. You might even see a new holder by association. Now, of course, being the punter Riley Dixon, more than likely. So this is going to be a spot to watch in training camp come summer.
Sure. I think for me, another third kind of position battle here is in regards to the wide receiver spot. So the third wide receiver spot, of course, as we know, the 1 and 2 is going to be Odell and Shepard. I think you're going to see a lot more Shepard outside than we have seen of him in the past. Usually he's been in the slot, but I think he's going to be outside a little bit more this year in Pat Shurmur's offense. And I think
do that, by the way.
Say again, Jeff?
He has the ability to do that, by the way. Because
he does. I think he did that a good amount in Oklahoma, if you recall.
Definitely. I'm a little biased against Big 12 guys a little bit, namely the quarterbacks, because first of all, the best Big 12 quarterback that's emerged in the past decade, maybe ever, has probably been Josh Freeman out of Kansas State, and Josh Freeman just recently retired from the CFL, so you can tell how he did.
Don't tell that to Baker Mayfield, though.
Well, that's why I was scared about drafting Baker Mayfield.
Yeah.
Look, of course you're going to post monster numbers in the Big 12. No one plays defense there, and everyone says that Shepard's peak might be a slot receiver, but I think he has the ability to expand far beyond that. But
and you know what's the problem? What is the stigma? And again, Jeff, this is not towards you. This is to the listeners or people who may say, oh, his ceiling is the slot receiver. Why is that an issue in a league where guys like Wes Welker is a Hall of Famer? Julian Edelman. Yeah, of course I could go down the list with a bunch of Patriots players, but
over in Dallas, Cole Beasley's making himself a solid living.
Exactly, Cole Beasley. Even years of there's tons of guys in the league you could say now that get drafted as slot receivers who end up being absolute studs. I mean, you can argue that Jarvis Landry is a slot receiver predominantly. I mean, I think that argument where some people may say that about, and I've seen this on Twitter with Giant fans, is, oh, well, he's really just a slot receiver. Okay, so what?
With that, no.
Right. And so I think that the third receiver spot, I think that's a big misnomer when it comes to wide receivers. Is if this guy is a wide receiver 1, he has to play on the outside. Well, that's not true. It just means he's your number 1 target. Mm-hmm. Now, if you want to say the X and the Z receiver, that's a different story. But regardless, I think the third wide receiver position for the Giants is going to be a really interesting one to watch. Of course, you got Roger Lewis, who has been apparently torching cornerbacks in OTAs, which is really encouraging. And if he could be consistent, I think he finished the year pretty strong. And I think that he could be obviously a big option there. You have Hunter Sharp, who came over from the Broncos practice squad out of Utah State.
Fun fact, Hunter Sharp, he became the 50th receiver to catch at least one touchdown pass from Eli Manning in the season.
So I think he's coming in, obviously, with a ton of steam. And I think a guy that we mentioned earlier in the show, Cody Latimer, he has done a lot in OTAs as well. And obviously, I think he's almost guaranteed a roster spot because of what he does on special teams. So if he can kind of stay consistent and kind of I think it's going to come down to, quite honestly, I think it's going to come down to Roger Lewis and it's going to come down to Cody Latimer. However, both those guys don't really separate themselves with special teams because they both play special teams. As you recall, Roger Lewis is a pretty decent gunner who saw a lot more time when Dwayne Harris was out with injury. So he's a pretty decent gunner on the punt team. And I think, the return game of Latimer as well. So that's going to be quite interesting to watch, especially when the numbers game comes down to it. So that will be one to watch.
I also want to give a ton of credit to Lewis because last offseason, he was kind of in the same boat as Flowers and Apple because remember last offseason, he was caught with a DUI. I believe he was drunk. I think it was a drug-related arrest. Nonetheless, he was arrested somehow, and everyone thought he would be gone by the end of training camp. But he had himself a very strong preseason and ended up getting himself another roster spot for the second year in a row. Of course, he being a undrafted free agent at a Bowling Green. In fact, if I recall correctly, scored the game-winning touchdown in the inaugural Camellia Bowl against South Alabama. Yes, I'm desperate in social life. But
fun fact. So this is Jeff. This is perfect. This is great. We're gonna have. I need you to at least have a couple of these every show.
No, but I think he's definitely has the resilience and he has the toughness to get through a tough situation. So that's definitely a battle I'll keep an eye on as well.
Definitely. So Jeff, just to kind of touch on the future of the program here, the podcast, we're hoping to potentially get the listeners involved. We'll probably put some questions out on Twitter. Please tweet us at Matt Genatino, MATT, and then it's GIANNETTINO. And then Jeff, your Twitter handle is Jeff GEOFF Mags MAGS, and it's 5490.
Nailed it.
5490. So please tweet us. We'll obviously take a look at those. potentially we'll get our own Twitter account. We'll look into stuff like that. And then, obviously we want your questions and your feedback on the show, looking to maybe get some interviews with some players down the line, if that's a possibility. Some, beat reporters. We'll try to have some guests here and there. So it'll be good moving forward. And we hope to, have your support, and help grow the show. Subscribe, share, like the show, and, hope you guys enjoy it moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is going to work out very well. I thought this one very well, for example. So, guys, keep listening and follow us. Kids, send us your questions and, do your thing.
Yes, absolutely. So, for Jeff Magliacetti, this is Matt Giannatino, episode 1 in the books.